Well, it's officially the best time of year for book content, which is, of course, the end of the year, when we get all of the wrap-ups from the previous year and all of the excitement about the year to come. So today we're going to be talking about my top 10 books from 2024. Hi, my name is Sarah Freshly, and welcome back to Freshly Read Books. I read a lot less books this year than I have in the past, 3 years, I would say. And so I was a little worried when I was thinking about, planning this video. But then once I looked at the books that I did read this year, I had some real wins and some real losses. So I feel like it's still gonna work for my best of and my worst of videos. Oh, I do wanna say this is going up until the end of November. I'm not counting any of the books that I read or finished in December, just because I always feel so behind when I make this video. So if I really love some books in December, I'll include them in my favorites of next year. So basically I'll run from December to November for my year of reading when it comes to these videos. Specifically, when it comes to stats, things like that, it'll still be to the year itself. I mostly wanted to say that because I'm currently reading A Little Life and it's amazing, and I feel like it probably would have been on this list otherwise, and I don't want anybody to think that I didn't love that book because I'm really loving it right now. So this year was a big year in following a lot of the reading that I really wanted to do and less of the reading that I felt like I should be doing. And a lot of that kind of showed itself in me exploring genres that I used to really love but haven't read in a long time. And so that kind of brings us to book number 10 on the list, which is Funny Story by Emily Henry. I filmed a video earlier this year that was reading all 5 of Emily Henry's viral books. I'm not sure how well you can see, but these are the 4 books, the 4 other books here. And then of course this is the book of hers that came out just this year. This was my favorite of the video, although in retrospect, I do think back on Book Lovers a lot more than I think back on Funny Story. So I just wanted to say that. Those were definitely my top 2 though, of all 5. In Funny Story, we're following Daphne, who has, at the beginning of the story, she gets broken up with by her fiance, Peter, who ends up getting with his childhood best friend, Petra. And Petra was dating Miles. So now Petra and Peter are together, and then Daphne needs somewhere to live, and Miles no longer has a roommate because Petra was there. So now Daphne and Miles are in the same apartment, but kind of out of convenience, they don't know each other that well. But that's kind of the premise of the story, which is a great way to kick off a romance novel, I have to say. I think that Emily Henry really hit with this one, making the main characters feel like full characters, as well as creating some great secondary characters that did feel like they had full-fledged personalities separate from our 2 main people, which I think that maybe her other books were kind of lacking. And also it felt like this book warranted the page count that it got. The whole thing felt like it was working towards something that either we were going through character growth or relationship growth or healing, and that was just really nice. And also just the friendships that were formed in it, I think that it was really great. And so this takes the 10th place spot on my favorite books of the year. But I will say that I did also love Book Lovers. I think character-wise they were my favorite, but I think that the characters in Funny Story were written better. Then the 9th book we have is The In Crowd by Charlotte Vassell. This is an arc that was sent to me by Doubleday Publishing. I read the other half last year by Charlotte Vassell. So this is a detective series basically. I will say it feels a little bit more connected than most detective series, but it does still, you could probably read this one without reading the previous. I wouldn't if I were you, because I actually loved the other half even more than this one. It was a 5-star read for me, whereas this was just under. So our detective in this, I think his name is Caius. I did know how to pronounce it, but it has entirely fled my brain since I read this. But he's kind of torn between this, the world that he, I guess, grew up in, which would be more middle class, maybe had to go through some struggles financially and definitely some struggles socially, but then he's also doing specifically looking into these cases that apply to this upper class portion of people, and the rules are super different when it comes to them. There's more eyes on him, career-wise, when he's looking into things like that. And so there's a lot that goes into it that just makes it a lot of fun. I think if you were somebody who liked watching Gossip Girl, the original one, or maybe the new one, I don't know, growing up, if that was something that you were into, I think, and if you like mysteries, then I think that you would like these books, because I think that it gives a little bit of that glitz and glamour, but also there being this like dark underbelly type feel, which I really, really like. And then coming in at number 8 is a big one. It's War and Peace by Leo Tolstoy. This one is translated by Anthony Briggs. The translation I've heard is the easiest to read, but not necessarily the one that people say is the best. So take with that what you will. I wanted the easiest one to read because it was still really hard to read, I'll be honest. I had been reading this for, I think it took me about a year to get through the whole thing, and I finished it in like January or February of this year, but I loved it. I was really surprised. I don't know why. I feel like I shouldn't ever be surprised when I end up loving a classic, because like obviously it's a classic for a reason, but also some classics I absolutely hate. And so I think I go into it with that trepidation like every time. But War and Peace is just so incredible. And seeing these same people going through two very different experiences throughout their lives, like being in this like time of luxury at the beginning, and then this time of like absolute destruction and war, and seeing those, like, you get kind of both sides at the beginning, but then as the story goes on, you start to see that the impacts of the war are seeping more and more into like the lives of the people that are not actively on the battlefront, and just like in the things that they have access to, in maybe like the places they live aren't the best places to be anymore, so they have to figure out where they're going, what they're bringing, things like that. And so these two like total separate, like War and Peace are separate at the beginning and then like slowly bleed into each other as the book goes on. And then in 7th, we have The Ministry of Time. So this was sent to me by Avid Reader Press, another ARC. This was so good. I do have a video like reading this one. I was actually like on a work conference while I read this one, but now it's like so entwined in my brain, like going on that trip and also reading this book. Like I can feel myself in that same hotel room while I just like look at this book. Basically, we get like kind of this like time travel story, a little bit of a romance in there, which I almost hesitate to mention because yes, it is in there, but that's really doesn't feel like the point of the book, but everywhere I see it in like genres, it's put in that. So that feels weird. I don't know. It feels like a weird thing, but I guess I'm going to mention it because they are certainly mentioning it whenever they talk about the book, like the people that are marketing the book. But it's really, I feel like, more about the time travel and the implications of bringing people from like the distant past into the present time period, but also being a part of maybe something larger without having any idea what the purpose of that thing is and what the implications of that are, how much responsibility is on you, or are you just like doing your best and you got a cool job where you get to know a little bit about time travel, so therefore like it's fine. It raises a lot of ethical, moral questions that I think are really cool in this type of setting where it makes it super accessible and like fun to read. And so you don't feel like you're reading about like ethical quandaries, but you are. 6th, we have A House with Good Bones by T. Kingfisher. So I do have a video that's going to be coming out that is going to cover this more. I couldn't get it out before doing like all the end of year, beginning of year stuff, so it'll probably be a minute now. This is a Southern Gothic. I don't know that I've ever read a Southern Gothic before. This is about a woman who, her mom is like acting a bit weird. So I think her name is Sam, the protagonist. Yes. So Sam's brother calls her and tells her that their mom is like acting a bit off after he visits with his wife. And so Sam, while she's like taking a break from work, she goes back to live with her mom in the house that was her grandmother's house. So her grandmother has like passed away at this point, and Sam's mom just like lives in that house. As soon as Sam gets there, like things do seem a little bit weird, but then that like slowly builds and builds throughout the story at like the perfect pace. I think it's so hard to nail the pace of suspense in books, and this one did it so well. And not only that, the atmosphere was amazing. And for me, atmosphere is everything. So that's probably a large portion of why I loved this book so much. I also liked the tie-ins to the past and even like familial past in general, not just Sam's past or her mom's past, but like generations back that you slowly learn and that like I didn't expect in the book, but I do think really added to it. I recommend reading it in the fall time, but maybe it's just because that's what I did and I loved it. So like now I'm like, that's the perfect way to read it, but probably any time of year if you're in the mood for some suspense, I think that this is a good book to pick up. And then my 5th place book, which I don't have a physical copy of, is Brotherless Night. This book destroyed me. Like, there was no book this year that destroyed me like that book destroyed me. So this book starts in 1981 in Sri Lanka, and it follows Sashi, who dreams of becoming a doctor. But because of the civil war that's happening during that time, like, we slowly see things kind of shift for her. Her motivations shift. The motivations of her family really shift. And she has several brothers, and they kind of get pulled into this civil war. And we also see Sashi herself getting pulled in, and she basically becomes a terrorist. Like, the very beginning of the book starts with her explaining that she was a terrorist for some time. And so, like, you know that going in, and then you meet Sashi, the 16-year-old who wants to be a doctor. It's really, like, heartbreaking to see these, like, two, to know what her future is and to see her in the present and think that, like, how in the world could those possibly match up? And then to see it happen, it's like, it's just really heartbreaking. But not necessarily seeing even her change, but the world around her change, her perception of the world around her, and then several things at the end of the book that just, like, every time I think about it, like, my heart sinks for that family, for their friends. And yeah, it's such a good book though. It is so good. I highly recommend reading it. So we just have 4 books left, and they are my only 5-star books of the year. But before we get to those, I do want to go over a couple of honorable mentions real quick. So first we have A Darker Shade of Magic by V.E. Schwab. This is the first book in a trilogy. This follows Kel, who is in Antari, which basically means that he can, like, travel between these universes. So basically the world that he lives in, there are like 4 parallel universes, and he uses colors to distinguish them, and particularly London. So he never really leaves London in any of these universes, and the Londons all, like, line up together. As for the rest of these, like, worlds, who knows? But there's Red London, which is the London that he comes from. There's Grey London, which is like the London as we know it, although it's set, like, in the past, it's not present day. There is White London, and there is Black London, which, like, doesn't exist anymore. So that's, like, a piece of this is a little bit of knowledge about Black London, but you do get to see the other 3 Londons quite a bit. And so Kel's in Antari, he can travel between them. And then we also have our other main character, Delilah, who lives in Grey London, and so she knows nothing of magic because that's, like, our world. But she is both of them are such great main characters. I really loved, again, the atmosphere of this one. I feel like V.E. Schwab did a great job. I'm so excited to read more from V.E. Schwab. I ended up buying the next 2 books of this right after. Actually, no, I was in the middle of this one, and I was back at the bookstore and I got the next 2 books. So I'm very clearly very excited about it, and just reading the ending made me even more excited. So I plan on picking up the second book pretty soon. But I think that the characters were just written so well, the atmosphere of it. I think the magic system is fun but pretty easy to understand. There was, like, a little bit at the beginning where I was worried that I wouldn't be able to keep, like, the London straight in my mind and, like, who was where, because at the very beginning, like, it starts with Kel kind of doing a full loop of the 3 Londons that he can travel between. And so I was having a hard time, but it does a great job of, like, reminding you of what's where. So I would say take the first chapter as more of, like, a introduction to his powers and less of a like, you have to remember each thing about each London. Like, you will get other chances to know that information. And so it didn't quite make the list, but I did still really like it, and so I wanted to talk about it. Along that same lines, Everyone in My Family Has Killed Someone by Benjamin Stevenson. This is another first book of a series. This is like a murder mystery that's set at, I think, a ski lodge. It's definitely like a lodge in the mountains, but everybody kind of has this, like, crazy backstory because obviously everyone in his family has killed someone. And also the narrator breaks the fourth wall a lot, but in really fun ways that kind of poke fun at different tropes from different mystery novels. The twists and turns, they're really fun. They're well paced throughout the book, so highly recommend if you're into mysteries. And then my last honorable mention real quick is Bright Young Women by Jessica Knoll. This book was so good. This is about the, like, Ted Bundy murders, but it, like, doesn't focus on Ted Bundy himself at all. In fact, his name is never mentioned. He's only mentioned as the defendant throughout the book. So it focuses on the women specifically. And I think throughout the whole thing, I had such a good time reading it, which is a weird thing to say about, like, a book that's obviously about, like, an absolute tragedy. But I think that it did such a good job of portraying the things that are so frustrating about being a woman and the types of things that, or expectations that are put on you, or the types of things that are said about women who terrible things happen to them, and yet somehow like they're blamed for it, and not necessarily always like the flat in your face things that are said, but like these smaller things that are just like, you don't have to say that. Like a lot of the men in their lives being like, oh, if I had been there, then like I would have protected you guys. And it's like, okay, like, dude, there was like a serial killer that broke in and we were all sleeping. Like, I'm sure you would have just saved the day though. Like, I'm sure that would have happened. So just little things like that, like where people think that they're saying the right things or nice things, but in reality, it's unnecessary and it just probably makes the other people involved feel worse, you know? The only thing that was disappointing is I feel like the ending didn't really pull it all together as much as I was hoping it would. Obviously, there's only so much you can do with the ending because this is based off like a real thing that really happened. I felt like it could have been done better is what I'm saying. Okay, so we are officially talking about the only 4 books that I gave 5 stars this year. So my 4th favorite book of 2024 was Assassin's Quest by Robin Hobb. This was the 3rd book in the Farseer trilogy, so the final book in that, and it did such a good job of bringing everything together. Like, it was so good. I wish I could read this for the first time again. I already want to read it again, but like I'm reading other Robin Hobb books, so like I need to not. I think I also really just like love a quest story. There's obviously a big quest in this one, but the series in general follows Fitz, who is this young boy, and at the very start of the first book in the trilogy, he's like 6 years old, and I think he grows into like maybe a teenager in that one. I struggled through that book. I don't love reading books that are set around like young protagonists, but then by the time we got to Royal Assassin, which I very well almost put on this list as well, except I didn't want to have like multiple books from the same series, but this was the 2nd book in the trilogy, and I also really loved it, and then I ended up loving the 3rd even more. Just like the ups and downs of this like whole quest, and it giving you the feeling that nothing is going right, and like how are we ever going to actually accomplish the thing that needs to be accomplished, that we've known needs to be accomplished for a long time, and all of this, it was just done so well. And additionally, another book I didn't want to put on the list, but I did consider putting on the list, was Ship of Magic by Robin Hobb, which is the 1st book in the Live Ship Traders trilogy, which exists in the same universe in the realm of the Elderlings as the Farseer trilogy, but it does follow like different characters and everything. So same world, different people, but I decided not to include it on the list just because I didn't want like my top 10 to be 3 Robin Hobb books. And then in 3rd place, we have Parable of the Sower by Octavia E. Butler. This book was so good. I knew right away when I started reading this one, and actually this is true for the last 3, like within 10 pages, I just knew the writing style was for me. I was all in. This is about Lauren, who is living in like kind of like a future version of our world. Technically it's set, like it starts in 2024, which is kind of funny. So I don't really remember when it was published, but it was meant to be set in like the near future when like climate change had more impacted the world, and also like a lot of social change has happened at this point. And so Lauren is living in California, and she's in this like cul-de-sac that is surrounded by a wall. And so they most of the time stay in there. The parents will leave, or like the adults will leave to like go to work or buy things that are needed, things like that. But they also have like their own chickens that live there, and they're trying to be like as self-sustaining as possible so that they don't need to leave as much. All the while, Lauren kind of feels like this can't possibly last forever. Like, people are gonna get desperate. This wall isn't gonna keep desperate people out forever. The people that just don't have things are going to look for the things that they need. And so she kind of wants to learn more about like survival things. She also is kind of like creating her own religion. It's a very unique religion where like God equals change in general. And I do really like that aspect of the book. I think it adds a lot to it. And there's so many like thought-provoking things that she has that are like meant to be this like scripture, or like part of the scripture of this religion that she kind of just like feels herself. And in addition to all of that, Lauren has what's called hyper empathy in the book, which is where she can literally feel the feelings of others. So if she sees somebody that gets injured, she feels it as if she had gotten that same injury. But it makes it tough to live in a world where people will literally fight you for resources, but then like if you fight back, you're also like injuring yourself. So great book, can't wait to read the 2nd second in the duology. Then we have I'm Thinking of Ending Things by Ian Reid. This is my second favorite book this year. This one I feel like totally caught me off guard. Like I was excited about it, but really I only got it because I saw that it was, I think, like a Netflix show, which came out a while ago, but the Netflix show itself looked interesting to me, so I decided to get the book, and I am so glad that I did, because this has got to be like one of my favorite books of all time. Again, I kind of feel similarly to how I talked about A House with Good Bones, like the suspense through this, but you honestly feel like you know nothing the whole time, and like you're just drip fed these like little bits, but they usually give you more questions than they do answers. And I think that it's just, and then like the twist at the end, I don't know, I can't really say much about this one without giving massive spoilers, but if you are looking for a book to read on like a cold winter's night, this is the one. Please pick this one. I mean, just looking at the cover, I feel like that alone should make you want to read in winter, but I just like, take it from me. You can read it so quickly, and it's an experience. And then my top book for 2024 is Burnham Wood by Eleanor Catton. I'm actually kind of surprised by this one. Like, I expected to like it, but I didn't expect to love it as much as I just fully did. Again, atmosphere. I feel like I could say the same thing about like all the top books. It's the atmosphere in them was amazing, but also just like the dialogue in this one, the descriptions of things, like everything was so good. Everything was brought together so well. And there's also, it's like questioning larger things without making it like the whole subject, or making it feel almost like it's life lessons like being handed to you, or like life questions being handed to you, but instead it's just like a story that exists on its own that makes you think about these things that I didn't expect to think about when reading the story. Does that make sense? I feel like I'm almost too excitable to even like talk about this book. This takes place in New Zealand, and there's been this landslide, and it cuts off this like one area from everything else. And there's a guerrilla gardening initiative, which basically will just like go to places and plant a garden where it won't be noticed, or where they're able to grow as much as possible before not being able to grow there anymore. But they're not like buying plots of land. Like that's the idea. It's like they don't have to buy plots of land. They can just like find these areas to do it in. So they find out that there was meant to be this complex, or this compound, what is it called? When like there's a bunch of houses all in the same like community. I'm fully drawing a blank, but whatever that is. Like there was meant to be one of those, but then because the landslide happened, then it's like this isn't gonna be able to be built for a long time. And so the Guerrilla Gardening Initiative wants to move in and get like a full spring's worth out of planting things, growing things, all that. Which, as I'm describing this, like it doesn't sound like that great of a story, but where it goes from there is great. The characters that we follow, we kind of like jump perspectives, but in a way that's really fluid. And then there's also this other character that comes in that I was not expecting at all. I think it's mostly because I really only read like the first half of the synopsis when I decided to buy this book. But he's like this very wealthy man, and he has specific things that he wants. But a lot of the book, or a lot of the question that's being asked is like, if you have two groups that are aiming for entirely different futures, but the way to get there could maybe overlap for a little bit, like, is it okay to do that even if their views are entirely opposing? And I think it does such a good job of asking that question, of providing different perspectives on it throughout, while it all being just like an actual story and not literally just like asking the question. So yes, my favorite book of 2024. So that was everything. That was my top 10 books of 2024. I feel like I had a really successful, like I feel like I found a lot of new favorites, which was exciting. Anyways, please let me know what your favorite book of this year was, or maybe a couple top books if you want, but at least what your top one was. I would really love to know, and it'll also help me in planning my next year of reading. Otherwise, I think the next video that's going to come out on my channel is going to be my worst books of 2024, and I have some bad ones on there that I actually haven't talked about yet. So definitely look forward to that. I'm gonna need a glass of wine, as I always need for that video, but it should be a fun time. But with that, thank you so much for watching. I hope that you enjoyed it, and if you did, please do consider subscribing, and I will see you in the next one.